Okay, so thank you everyone for being here on this smoky ash-filled day when climate change is at the top of our minds. I welcome you to the Berkeley City Council District 2 Candidate Forum hosted by Berkeley Neighbors for Housing and Climate Action, Bike Berkeley, and CalDems. My name is Betsy Thagard, and I will be moderating this forum and asking questions for Berkeley Neighbors for Housing and Climate Action. Berkeley Neighbors educates voters about the connection between Berkeley's housing shortage and its increasing climate change emissions. Carbon dioxide from transportation constitutes 60% of Berkeley's climate change emissions, and those emissions are going up, not down. Scientists have directly linked these increasing emissions to growing automobile travel caused by Berkeley's housing shortage. Because Berkeley has not built enough homes over the past 50 years, more and more workers cannot afford to live in the city in which they work, and so they must drive to work from further and further away. Workers now commute daily to Berkeley from Stockton, Tracy, and Manteca. To ease our housing shortage and reduce our climate emissions, Berkeley Neighbors advocates more housing of all types and all income levels. We especially want more housing for our low-income and extremely low-income neighbors. And because most low-income housing is built with fees on construction or market rate housing, maximizing the number of homes for our lower income neighbors requires Berkeley to facilitate construction of market rate housing. That housing is what funds the more affordable developments. Berkeley Neighbors also calls for zoning changes to allow construction of more missing middle housing, homes for middle income workers such as teachers, firefighters, office workers, and municipal employees. These workers do not qualify for subsidized low-income housing, and Berkeley's housing shortage has resulted in rents and home prices that are too damn high. Infill housing in single-family neighborhoods is one of the best ways to promote homes for middle-income families, so that people who serve our community can also afford to live here. Ben, will you introduce Bike Berkeley?
Sure, thanks Betsy. My name is Ben Gerhardstein. I'm a coordinating committee member with Bike Berkeley. We are an all-volunteer organization that advocates for a healthy, equitable, and sustainable transportation system in Berkeley for people of all ages and abilities. As Betsy already said, 60% of Berkeley's climate emissions are transportation related. People in Berkeley want to walk, bike, and use transit to meet their daily needs, but many are forced to drive because we haven't provided safe infrastructure and reliable transit. People in Berkeley, in fact, walk or bike for 40% of trips already, but unfortunately experience 80% of the severe and fatal collisions. Those collisions are disproportionately located in historically redlined South and West Berkeley. Our sidewalks and street surfaces are broken, the bicycle boulevard network is riddled with unsafe intersections, and none of our arterials have bus lanes. So we need to take bold action to meet our climate, safety, equity, and housing goals. At Bike Berkeley, our current priorities include the quick implementation of the city's Vision Zero action plan to eliminate severe and fatal collisions by 2028, ensuring that the city implements council's BBMBAP referral from last year to dedicate at least 50% of repaving funds to bikeways and high pedestrian injury streets, and advancing the movement for Black Lives by transferring traffic and parking enforcement from the Berkeley Police Department to unarmed personnel in a new equity and safety-focused Berkeley Department of Transportation, or BERCDOT. We're looking forward to hearing your thoughts on these and other topics this evening, and I'll now pass it over to Davina to introduce CalDems.
All right, thank you, Ben. Hi, everyone. My name is Davina Sir-Udom. I go by the she, her pronouns, and I'm here today on behalf of Cal Berkeley Democrats, the official Democratic chapter of UC Berkeley. A little bit about our organization is that we advocate for progressive change, specifically through policies and individuals that will act with student interests in mind. Now, shifting more onto the topic of students and being a student myself, it's clear that Berkeley is home to many students with a variety of distinct backgrounds, perspectives, and stories are so clearly drawn to the city. You know, we see this through the welcoming community and the countless opportunities that Berkeley provides to us. And we also see in return how eager students are to be a part of this community that encourages them to collaborate and speak and interact in meaningful ways with others that contributes towards the cultural diversity and vitality of Berkeley. But alternatively, though, we also see this lack of support among students, especially in terms of housing. UC Berkeley ranks the lowest out of 9 in the entire UC system in the percentage of students that are housed, and this is clearly reflected and shown when you hear the countless stories of students who are struggling to make ends meet, where they have to work multiple jobs or couch surf because they don't have any stable form of housing. And so this just further highlights the issue in which housing currently serves as a barrier to students, where they have to struggle between meeting their educational goals as well as worrying about whether their basic necessities will be met. So today, I'm very excited to hear from all the candidates in terms of their plans, and I thank everyone here for attending and being a part of this forum tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you, Davina. So this is the way our forum will work. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to introduce themselves and their ideas about housing, transportation, and climate policies in Berkeley. Then we moderators will take turns asking the candidates 2 questions from each organization. Each candidate will be asked the same questions, and they will be called on a rotating basis so that everyone has a chance to go first. And each candidate's answer will be limited to 1 minute. After the prepared questions are answered, each of the moderators will choose 1 question submitted anonymously from the audience through the Google form found in the chat box. Finally, each candidate will be given 1 minute to sum up their policy ideas regarding how to address Berkeley's housing, transportation, and climate change needs. Because we have 2 forums going on tonight and a lot of candidates, it's really important for us to stick to the time limits. Savelin Hauser will be our timekeeper. Savelin, you want to show us all how that's going to work? Savelin, are you there?
Oh, yes, right here. So everybody saw the illustration of what I'll do when your time is up.
Okay, and then if people are going on much too long, what will you do? Make funny faces?
I will shake my fists and ask for the host to mute.
Okay. Thank you. All right, let's start with the candidate introductions, and we're going to go alphabetically by first name. So our first candidate's 2-minute introductions are by Alex Sharinko. Alex?
Wonderful. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. So my name is Alex Sharinko, and I'm a solar energy scientist. I'm a community volunteer with the Berkeley Youth Alternatives, a tutor and mentor in the after-school program. I'm with the Friends of Strawberry Creek Park, and I'm a city commissioner, where I've served on the Housing Advisory Commission, the Commission on Labor, and the Zero Waste Commission, working and writing policy on building housing for our teachers and addressing the racial wage gap. But really, the timing of tonight's event couldn't be more relevant, as we're all living under a literal cloud of ash from forest fires. And the thing that I think it's important to say right here at the beginning is we did this. We did this by dumping billions of tons of greenhouse gases into our atmosphere and making the planet hot. We did this by not building enough housing in the inner bay close to jobs and pushing people farther and farther out, living in forests that should be naturally burning. And so I think we have to take current events incredibly seriously so that this isn't a new normal. That means building a world without fossil fuels. I don't want to be glib, that's going to be difficult, but that is where we need to head. No ands, ifs, or buts. And that means building cities without fossil fuels, which will take more than empty declarations. It will take real change and real action. We need to make it safe to walk and bike in our city. We need to legalize missing middle housing. We need to invest in public transportation. And we need leaders that understand the scale of the problem and are prepared to act. So the last few days has either been a preview of the future or a wake-up call. And I'm here to tell you I'm wide awake. On council, I'll act to build a Berkeley without fossil fuels, because progressive values is not enough anymore. We need real progress. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Next up is incumbent Cheryl Davila. Cheryl?
Hi there. Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me here. I'm Councilmember Cheryl Davila, was elected in 16, an unexpected victory. And I'm happy to serve the city of Berkeley in District 2. Since in 16, I answered the call for regular ethical people who care about our community to serve the public. And I've been doing that since. Sorry, I just got discombobulated for a second. Okay, so I answered the call for regular ethical people to be part of the change they want to see made. 4 years later, I'm running for re-election to continue the work that I've started in advancing bold climate solutions, promoting affordable housing and care for our unhoused community, demilitarizing the police and reimagining community safety while demilitarizing the police. We have, and reimagining, we have to reallocate that money towards organizations that are already doing the work. I've been living and renting in Berkeley for 39 years, married to my husband for 33 years, and we raised our children in Berkeley and they went through the Berkeley Unified School Districts. I'm the chair of a regional climate emergency mobilization task force and a regional RV and tiny home solutions to homelessness task force. The Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force is holding a series of summit webinars, a summit series on the first one we had in July, the second one we just had August 28th, which was on fossil-free Bay Area. And the third one is on electrification of buildings, transportation, etc. So I hope that you can join us. You can go to the cemtf.org. It's been around since since February 2019, and we're going strong. And we're doing a lot of things to help the Bay Area move together faster on climate and everything else. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Cheryl. Our next candidate is Terry Taplin. Terry?
Hello, good evening. My name is Terry Taplin. I'm the Vice Chair of the Berkeley Transportation Commission and a climate, mobility, and racial justice activist born and raised in Southwest Berkeley. My husband and I losing our apartment and being temporarily displaced from Berkeley made me a housing activist. Seeing my mother lose her mobility made me a mobility justice advocate. When I was a youth commissioner, Berkeley Tuolumne Camp burned down in the Rim Fire. Since then, climate-fueled wildfires have worsened year over year. This is what has made me a climate activist. I am running for city council because West Berkeley has the potential to be a hub for green jobs, an ideal walkable, bikeable neighborhood with robust connections to transit and access to green space, and a model for affordable infill housing compact growth. However, the most diverse part of town is faced by the most dangerous streets for cyclists and pedestrians. The cost of housing has displaced entire communities. Our roads and stormwater infrastructure are deteriorating, and Strawberry Creek and Aquatic Park are vulnerable to contamination. Facing the housing and climate crises requires more than speeches, resolutions, and abstentions. District 2 needs leadership capable of combining bold, progressive vision with a laser-sharp focus on West Berkeley and unwavering commitment to constituent services. The city needs solutions-oriented, data-driven leaders who can build diverse, intersectional coalitions and collaborate with neighbors, council colleagues, and regional allies to get things done. As Vice Chair of the Transportation Commission and a member of Walk Bike Berkeley, the Sierra Club, Sunrise Bay Area, and the East Bay Transit Riders Union, I've advanced and advocated for initiatives to improve pedestrian and bicycle safety, invest in public transit, expand micro and electric mobility options, and push back against service cuts, enabling the city of Berkeley to advance its climate action goals. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Terry. All right, and our next candidate and the last is Timothy Carter. Timothy?
Thank you. Do you mind repeating the question?
We're asking you to give us a 2-minute introduction to yourself and your thoughts on Berkeley's policies towards housing, transportation, and climate change.
All right, well, first of all, let me thank you guys for inviting me and seeking your endorsement. A little bit about myself. I've been in Berkeley since 1997. In District 2, I've been a small Berkeley-based business owner for over 2 decades in District 2. My kids have all attended Berkeley Unified School District, currently attend and have graduated. And that's one of the things that's motivated me to run for city council. I want to create a city and be part of a city where my kids will be able to come back to. And that really comes down to housing. Housing is an underpinning for 90% of the issues that Berkeley faces today. So if we can address housing in a cohesive manner that will allow for high density residential, near transit, in a manner that the city needs to be involved in to make sure it continues and stays affordable, I think we can achieve the goals that we're looking for, which is reducing carbon emissions, which is making streets safer by reducing the number of vehicles on the street. And I think we can do this if we have the right coalition and leadership at the City Council. So I'm also the Personnel Commission Chair for the Berkeley Unified School District. And as chair, what I found is that it's essential to have the ability to bring opposing viewpoints to the table and facilitate meaningful conversations in order to find solutions. And I think you have to do that as a city council member to make sure you address what's important to your constituents. And being a customer-based business that I am, I've got a unique perspective because I see my clients over the last 2 decades and they express to me their concerns. They live in Berkeley like I do, and they're concerned about the environment like I am. I think I'm getting that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Timothy. All right, let's go to our questions from the 3 organizations who are hosting this forum. Ben, do you want to start with Bike Berkeley's first question? Then we'll rotate through the candidates again in alphabetical order, this time starting with Cheryl Davila.
Sure, thanks. So Alameda County, as you all probably know, is planning the future of the San Pablo corridor right now. So our question is, do you support prioritizing bus lanes, bike lanes, and safe pedestrian crossings over vehicle travel lanes and parking along San Pablo Avenue? Why or why not?
Cheryl?
Thank you for the question. So, of course, I support a bus lane because currently there is a rapid transit, but it kind of gets in the way of the other cars get in the way of the rapid transit buses. So I think it would be important to do that. However, removing the parking, I met with numerous merchants, business owners on San Pablo that are really concerned about where their customers will park. So I think that's an issue that they brought to the table that I've been considering. However, you know, a lot of the meters aren't used anyway. So, and all the streets surrounding the area are free parking. So even though parking is limited, there is additional parking. So of course I support those ideas for San Pablo. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Okay, Terry, you're next.
Yes, I support prioritizing safe pedestrian crossings, bus lanes, and bike lanes. I spent a lot of time on San Pablo. I participated in a San Pablo Avenue traffic safety tour along with fellow mobility activists. And as many of us here know, San Pablo Avenue has some of the highest rates of collisions for pedestrians. I think that in order for us to get folks out of cars, we have to provide more options for them to do so. I've spoken with a number of employees in the local San Pablo businesses. A number of them work and live in the neighboring cities. So there's a natural communication between Emeryville and West Berkeley, for example. And I think that these are the kinds of modal shifts we should be prioritizing. Thank you.
Thank you. Timothy?
So I think there needs to be a balance. My business is located on San Pablo and Ward, and I've been here for, like I said, over 2 decades. Parking is an issue. But that being said, with the climate emergency that we're undergoing right now, I think there needs to be a really good balance between the needs of the community and the needs of the businesses, the small businesses here on San Pablo, which is the small businesses are the lifeblood of the city. I think with the proposal that OBAG has put together, there is a solution that works for both parties. So one of the plans that I had saw was you have parking on one side, dedicated bus lane and bike lane, which would still allow the businesses and their customers a place to park, albeit not as convenient as it is today, but still that would strike a balance. I don't think we don't need to make a choice. I think there's a balance there, and I think we can attain it as long as we work together to get it.
Thank you, Timothy. Alex.
Yes. So I think we have to have the courage to imagine a better future, a better way of living our lives. And I think that means prioritizing public transit. That means making our streets safer. So I absolutely support enhanced pedestrian safety features on San Pablo corridor. And I support dedicated bus lanes because, like I said, we have to really reimagine what we're doing and ask ourselves, is it pushing us towards or farther away a fossil fuel-free Berkeley? There's legislation in California to fund and get AC transit buses to be all electric. Imagine a prioritized all-electric bus going up and down San Pablo. That's the fossil fuel-free future we need to be working towards. As far as bike lanes, a lot of investment are going into 9th Street, which is where one of our bicycle boulevards right now. I don't know if it'll make sense to also do investments on San Pablo corridor. It depends on what other cities are doing. I'm open to having that conversation. But I think we absolutely need to prioritize bus lanes. An electrified bus all the way from Oakland to Richmond is an amazing thing for the East Bay, and I support it.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, Davina, would you like to ask the first question for CalDems? And Terry, you'll be the first person to answer.
Yeah, so my first question is, how do you plan on encouraging the UC to pursue greater action in resolving housing affordability issues among students, workers, and the broader community?
Terry?
Thank you. I used to intern in the District 7 office, which is a student-run office. Well, it's staffed by students with a lot of interns and stuff. It often feels student-run. So I definitely am committed to bringing in the student community to be more engaged with our civic processes. I think partnering with CalDems and the other student leadership orgs, having an open door to them and making sure that all of our boards, all of our community projects have decisive and committed student presence is a way to go. And yeah, I think anytime there's any kind of public process, there should be student voices represented.
Thank you, Terry. Timothy, you're next.
Could you repeat the question one more time for me?
Davina?
Yes, so the question is, how do you plan on encouraging the UC to pursue greater action in resolving housing affordability issues among students, workers, and the broader community?
So I think there needs to be a partnership between the city and UC, which I think has begun, which is a great thing. And I think through that partnership, there can be a balance struck. And the way to encourage the university is one, to help make tuition more affordable, which then would allow the students more funding for their housing. That, along with partnerships where we maybe build affordable housing units for students and for the public, the employees and the people who work here, it's got to be the only way to accomplish those goals. I think the students are an important part of the city, and they deserve they deserve a voice, and they deserve affordable housing as well.
Thank you, Timothy. Alex, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. So I think it's important to acknowledge that the university has largely failed in this regard. I mean, as you said in your opening comments, there's housing less than 10% of their population, and that's a failure on their part. It's also important to acknowledge that the city has no hard policy levers to pull here. The UC is largely independent. So it all comes down to soft power. It all comes down to activism, to relationship building. It all comes down to, having difficult conversations about how the UC and the city coexist, and, what is a complicated town and gown relationship. And I think that requires people who can listen to different viewpoints, who are comfortable advocating for housing, have advocated for housing as I have, at all income levels for all people. And so I think that there's no simple answer here other than difficult conversations, constant activism, and constantly remembering that housing is an important issue.
Thank you, Alex. Cheryl.
Thank you. Can you repeat the question, please?
Davina?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you plan on encouraging the UC to pursue greater action in resolving housing affordability issues among students, workers, and the broader community?
Thank you for the question. So, right now we're in negotiations with UC Berkeley. So we have an opportunity to make some changes. It's very important that they provide housing for their students. There's a lot of housing insecurity amongst grad students, undergrad students, and the UC is not doing enough to make sure that they are housing their students. Right now, it's not a problem because of COVID, unfortunately, but UC has a lot of property. The chancellor's house is not being utilized. So we could build on UC campus property, as well as converting some market rate units, I feel is important, because right now we have all these market rate units and all of them aren't being utilized. And some of them are empty right now because of COVID. So I think trying to get some of these property owners to convert and change the outcomes for people that are unhoused and their students that are unhoused to make them more affordable for UC and have UC build on their property. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Cheryl. So I'll ask the first question for Berkeley Neighbors for Housing and Climate Action. And Timothy, you'll be the first to answer. Other progressive cities like Portland, Oregon, and Minneapolis are addressing their housing shortages by passing missing middle infill zoning legislation that permits and incentivizes the construction of duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes on parcels zoned single family. Would you support this type of legislation in Berkeley? And why or why not?
Absolutely. I think the underpinning, as I was saying earlier, for a lot of our issues here in Berkeley is housing. And any way we can address that, I would support it. I think the missing middle plan, where it allows duplexes and triplexes on single family lots, I think is a great way to address some of the issues that are off of the main corridor. I believe on the main corridor throughout the city, I believe we should focus on high density residential that will allow for less traffic, less vehicles. But on the offset of the main corridor, I believe that's a perfect way to address some of the housing issues naturally without having a ton of outside investment through large developers coming in. So I completely support that option.
Thank you. Alex.
Yes, I think Portland is the gold standard in zoning reform right now, and we need to look to them on those issues. So right now, we basically only allow single family homes to be built and very large apartment buildings to be built. And that's the two most expensive types of homes that you can build. And that's always going to advantage wealthier people. So you guys can't see, but I'm in my living room, and next door to me, there's a 6-unit building, and behind me, there's a 5-unit building. Most of the people living there are people of color that have been there for a long time, because these are naturally affordable types of housing that can be built. And by not allowing this naturally affordable type of housing, we're saying that we only want wealthy people in our community. And I think that's not okay. And so we lived our values with Measure O by having this huge affordable housing bond. I support that. That's fantastic. but that will only go so far. At the end of the day, we have to allow naturally affordable housing to be built, and that's what missing middle housing is.
Thank you, Alex. Cheryl?
Thank you. So if the missing middle is, if it's going to be distributed equitably throughout the city, not just in specific zones. Because, you know, where I live in the flats, there are lots of single family homes, lots of duplexes and lots of triplexes. However, in the hills, that might not be so much. So I feel like, and missing middle, is it going to be affordable? It has to be affordable, because right now, everything that's built is market rate. So we need to ensure that whatever we build is going to be affordable for everyone, and have low income folks be able to move into those units. So I think as long as it's the zoning is equitable throughout the city and not just in some parts of it, then I would support it. But if it's just going to be in one specific area without being equitable, then no, I don't support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Terry, you're next.
Yes, I support legalizing duplexes, fourplexes, missing middle housing. I'm not too far from Alex. This neighborhood used to have a lot more types of housing, and then it was downzoned to keep out families like mine. I think that to really redress Berkeley's history of racist redlining, we have to legalize multifamily housing. Like Tim was saying, it doesn't all have to be, you know, it makes sense for the corridors to have denser kinds of housing and the neighborhoods to have more moderate density. And these should be in all of Berkeley's residential neighborhoods, not just West Berkeley or South Berkeley. So I support this very much.
Thank you, Terry. Okay, Ben Gerhardstein, do you want to ask the second question from Walk Bike Berkeley?
Sure, let's do it. Okay, so our second question is whether, as a city council member, you would support creating this Berkeley Department of Transportation that we've been advocating for. And if yes, what your priorities for a safety and equity focused BerkDOT would be.
Alex, you're first.
Yeah, so I think this is part of a larger conversation about what public safety institutions look like moving forward, which is an incredibly important conversation as we look at building a more racially equitable society and city. I absolutely support looking at depolicing or not using armed officers in traffic stops. I think largely it can be avoided. You know, there's a lot of reforms like this we can look at, using mental health workers, using social workers, displacing some of what armed officers do right now. I think some of these reforms we might want to look at with pilot programs. Some of these reforms we can look to where it's been done other places and we don't need pilot programs and we can jump right in. We need to be thoughtful about how we do it. We need to use data from Berkeley's police audits, which is hopefully about to start, as we look for these reforms. But as I said earlier, we have to be courageous to imagine a better future. Just because the way we do something now does not mean that's how we have to keep doing it. So I support looking at these reforms.
Thank you. Cheryl?
Thank you. So yes, so yeah, we definitely don't need armed people to do some services that the police are doing now. So I support the DOT, but you know, we really have to think creatively and be bold. Now is the time to change business as usual and really imagine what we can do differently. You know, we already know that 40% of policing goes to the mental health crisis calls. So we can take that out of the equation as well, you know. But, you know, the transportation DOT is a very good idea, and it's a start. But we have to also think really creatively on what else we can do to make policing, you know, more community friendly. you know, not have it be such a burden on people of color, period. Black lives do matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Terry, you're next.
As a Black person, I know how fatal these kinds of stops can be, and we know that there is a huge racial disparity in police stops. As a member of Walk Bike Berkeley, I've been an active participant in advancing this and moving this forward. I'm also working with folks to think through it. For me, my priorities are figuring out, like if we're using cameras, how to answer all the privacy questions, how do we handle things like DUIs, and how do we, you know, if we have unarmed, unsworn city staffers pulling people over, how do we make sure those don't become dangerous for them? And we also have to think through the labor and personnel questions involved in transforming the responsibilities of the department. So those are my priorities, but this is something I am not only supportive of, but like very much committed to. And on council, this will be one of my priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Timothy, your turn.
Great, and I want to make sure I summarize the question, which is, would I support BRCDOT, which is the transportation transportation item that was presented to the City Council. Is that correct? All right, so let me just start by saying that's just a tip of the iceberg. That's just a piece of the puzzle that is manifests itself from systemic racism that comes from the police department. So just addressing BRCDOT, whether I support it or not, is a real difficult question, because the actual goal is to help reduce the amount of racist stops or try to address the systemic racism and the bias that are implicit with police. So BRCDOT is just a Band-Aid. Will I support it at this point? Well, yeah, that may be the best we have, but ultimately we need to find a way to fix the problem. So one of the ideas and one of the suggestions I have is it's not the police that are necessarily the issue. It's the fact that they all have guns. Why are we getting guns to every person who graduates the academy who hasn't gone through the right training? Those are the things that kill us. So I think, first of all, there's a lot of things that need to be discussed when it comes to policing, and I clearly don't have time for it right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Davina, second question from CalDems.
All right. Hello again. So my second question is, how would you approach balancing the housing needs of the growing student community with the needs of existing community members who are at risk of displacement?
Cheryl?
So earlier I stated that I honestly feel like we need to try to get landlords to do things differently with all these empty units. But we also need to get them to accept Section 8 housing and all the other subsidized vouchers that people have available to them. Students, you know, don't necessarily qualify for those subsidies, but you know, they still, you know, maybe we have a student rate for housing while students are students, you know, I don't know, but we have to be creative. We have to be able to house all our people in our city that want to and love Berkeley, that want to stay here and be housed and live here. So we have to come up with creative ways to do this. And I think one thing is to really get more people to open up their homes, because lots of people have homes and empty rooms that they could be renting out to people, but we have to match them up. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Terry?
Thank you. Yeah, I think we have to both you know, invest in anti-displacement measures and get creative there. You know, I support housing cooperatives and community land trusts, these kinds of models that aren't meant to protect permanently affordable housing. We also have to keep in mind that a lot of students don't qualify for affordable housing. So along with affordable housing, we have to have housing that's accessible to students. So I think it's going to take a combination of protecting tenants and producing housing at all levels of income. and we have to make sure that like that's inclusive of students as well as new young families. So yeah, stronger tenant protections and more housing overall, I think. And yeah, I also think that's important to enforce our ban on Section 8 discrimination. And a lot of our tenants have strong protections, but there's not always a lot of oversight. So it's going to require more vigilance on behalf of council and housing advocates to make sure that no one's being mistreated.
Thank you, Terry. Timothy?
So this is a difficult question because I have kids in college who are paying market rate rent for their units. So I get the struggle, but it's really incumbent upon UC to make sure they provide housing for their students. If I had to prioritize, if you're asking me if I had to prioritize over our residents and over students, I would have to prioritize our current residents who struggle every day to help support this community and who've been here for years. I prioritize housing for them over the students, and I'll put the onus on UC Berkeley to provide housing. They have the funding, they have the resources, and they have the land. They just need the motivation to make sure they provide housing for the students. Berkeley residents do not have access to student housing. So there needs to be a balance, again, a balance with what we support the students outside of UC Berkeley, how we support the students outside of UC Berkeley for taking housing that may be for our missing middle. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. Alex?
Yes, we absolutely need tenant protections to protect people at risk of displacement. UC absolutely needs to build more housing. We need to take a good hard look in the mirror and say, what are we doing? We can't use these excuses to not do anything. And one of the perverse things about being in a housing crisis, where we're driven by a scarcity of homes, is it turns us against each other. It forces people to compete. There are winners and there are losers. And the losers are the people that can't afford to pay. They're lower income, more vulnerable people. And I think that's the thing that is so terrible about our housing crisis, but it doesn't have to be that way. Abundant housing is affordable housing. And that's the way we need to approach this problem. One of the reasons that I was motivated to run is the incumbent vote against a project downtown that would have added over 150 units on top of a BART station, put $10 million into our affordable housing trust fund, and been built by middle-class union labor. It's a win-win-win-win. That's the kind of thing that the city can do to help this project, to not turn us against each other, to saying, well, if one group's wins, the other group has to lose and make this a zero-sum project. Everyone can win if we look at housing as an abundant resource, if we make housing an abundant resource. And that's what I'm committed to doing on council.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, I'll ask the second question from Berkeley Neighbors for Housing and Climate Action. And Terry, you will be the first up to answer. Construction of low-income and extremely low-income housing requires large government subsidies, most of which comes from fees on the construction of market rate housing. How will you ensure that Berkeley raises as much money as possible to build as many homes as possible for our low-income and extremely low-income neighbors?
I think that when it comes to like putting more money towards our goals, this is where projects like Hero Way come in, where we have $10 million going into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, because we can use those funds to leverage, to increase affordability in other places, and also invest in our own kinds of, city-owned social housing, so to speak, down the line further, perhaps. And yeah, so I think like preserving projects that pay into the Housing Trust Fund, also removing parking minimums from projects to make more space available for below market rate construction within projects are two things I would support.
Thank you. Timothy?
Can you repeat that question one more time, please?
Yes. Construction of low-income and extremely low-income housing requires large government subsidies, most of which comes from fees on the construction of market rate housing. How will you ensure that Berkeley raises as much money as possible to build as many homes as possible for our low-income and extremely low-income neighbors?
So this question, this is a great question. I think it needs a different view. So when we're talking about raising money, how we get it done, there's fees and taxes. Those are our only levers. We need to create a naturally occurring housing market that is sustainable. So what that means is the city needs to get back involved in building affordable housing. So we're in it from the beginning. We're in it from the purchase, we're in it from the design, construction, and renting to our affordable, to the people in this district, in the city, who need affordable housing. We need to be in control from beginning to end. If not, it will always be a series of more fees, more taxes that's not sustainable for this city. It's only a city. We don't have the resources to build the kind of housing that we need. It needs to be a sustainable source. With the city involved, the profits from that would go into more housing, and it would be organically done. That is the process. That is the structure we need to build. And thank you.
Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with voting yes on projects that are going to put $10 million into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which the incumbent failed to do. I mean, that's a huge deal. As someone else mentioned, those fees are leveraged sometimes up to 4-to-1, which means that's $40 million worth of affordable housing that the incumbent didn't support. So it starts with voting yes. But it also means holding developers accountable. So there's a project being proposed, or there's projects being proposed that are group living type accommodations, have minimal kitchens, and this is a way to avoid our affordable housing fund fees. And we need to look at that, maybe change that to a per square foot basis so that developers can't use tricks to avoid paying into our affordable housing trust fund. So, we vote yes on good projects that pay into our affordable housing trust fund and that build affordable housing, and then hold developers accountable when they try to skirt our rules and use loopholes, so that we're getting those funds so that taxpayers don't have this entire burden on themselves. Because even though Berkeley has amazing values, the gap in the funding is so huge, we can't do it ourselves. We need those fees.
Thank you, Alex. Cheryl?
Thank you. So the 18-story building was 300 market rate units. Market rate, not one affordable unit in the building. Lovely, they wanted to put $10 million into the trust fund, but that's not what it's all about. It's about, they didn't want to give back any community benefits. So we need to really come up with different ways of financing these buildings, because we don't need any more market rate housing. We need affordable housing, and maybe the feds need to come clean with some incentives for housing, the state, I don't know. But the housing trust fund is great, but I think we really need affordable units so that more people can get housed. And when you have an 18-story building with 302 market rate units and no affordable housing, not even a community room that the public can utilize, I can't support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Okay, now we're going to go to questions from the audience. Each of the moderators will choose a question from the Google form that people have been entering questions into. Those questions are entered anonymously. We don't know who is entering them. And we will try to take questions that are similar and formulate them into one. So Ben, are you ready with your first question from the audience? And Timothy, you'll be the first person to answer.
Okay, so this question is, I live with a disability that makes it unsafe for me to drive. That means I'm 100% dependent on walking and transit. What are your housing and transportation policy ideas to prioritize access for people like me?
So for people with disabilities, I think the high density residential plan that's really close to transportation would be ideal. If the city were so committed to start to build and get involved from the beginning, I believe these units could be affordable. And if for some reason they would have, if for some reason they need to be market rate, then the city would be able to control the profit to reinvest into other units that may be affordable. So I think that with the city being involved, creating high density units closer to public transit, very similar to what's going on near the BART station, I think those options would be very beneficial to you. And I support those.
Thank you, Timothy. Alex, you're next.
So I think it's incredibly important that we're building a city for everyone and that we have the empathy to look past just our own needs, just our own abilities. And so I really appreciate the question. Thank you so much. I think enhanced pedestrian access and upgrades on San Pablo corridor are incredibly important. It is a very dangerous place to try to cross, and it bisects the district. If you want to go anywhere, you usually have to end up crossing San Pablo. So that's something I wholeheartedly support. And back to the point about bus lanes and prioritizing bus lanes, you shouldn't have to wait 30 minutes to go wherever you want to go. That's a penalty people with private cars don't have to pay. And we shouldn't make people with different level abilities or different income levels that depend on public transit pay that penalty. That makes them, late for work or less productive or whatever. And we shouldn't build a world where that penalty is baked in. So that's one of the reasons I support prioritizing buses on San Pablo so that it becomes an equitable and efficient form of transportation for people like the question asker.
Thank you, Alex. Cheryl?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Ben?
So the question is, I live with a disability that makes it unsafe for me to drive. That means I'm 100% dependent on walking and transit. What are your housing and transportation policy ideas to prioritize access for people like me?
We need to make sure that every unit that, in any development, that they're ADA compliant and, I can't think of the terminology I want to use right now, and we also need to make sure that the crosswalks, the buttons to push for the light, all those things are accessible for people with disabilities. We need to make sure that, mobility of all modes is accessible to everyone in Berkeley. We need to make sure, when the Vision Zero, redlining, people of color got hit, all people are getting hit. We need to make sure that our city is safe and has all the things in place to make sure that people can cross the street safely, walk, bike, or even drive if they need to. But AC transit is free right now. That's the other thing that we need to make sure that we can somehow make sure, keep that going after COVID, and make sure that transportation is more accessible and affordable. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Terry?
Yes, housing close to transit, universal ADA accessibility for multifamily buildings, safe pedestrian crossings. Also, I think for moving forward, we'll want to push back against any potential cuts to AC Transit service. And we'll want to partner with AC Transit to maintain robust paratransit service. And these are relationships I've been building as a commissioner over the past year. I also support expanding electric shuttles, serving disabled folks and seniors. And yeah, definitely a lot of our community members are transit dependent. So partnering with our transit agencies will be a huge asset going forward.
Thank you. All right, Davina, your chosen question from the questions from the audience.
All right, so this question is, what are some of the specific changes or policies City Council can adopt in order to reduce Berkeley's usage of fossil fuels?
And our first person is Alex.
Got it. So I think it's incredibly important that we start to think of greenhouse gas issues as housing issues and as transportation issues, because most of the greenhouse gas emissions in Berkeley come from transportation. We haven't built housing, people can't live here, so they're commuting in and out from very far away. That's one of the big problems with the Bay Area in general. It's why we have more super commuters that spend over 2 hours in their car a day than any other region in the country. And so, one of the things I've supported, one of the things I've talked about tonight is bus lanes on San Pablo, and I'm going to keep harping on that because that's a climate change investment. That's not just a transportation issue; it's a climate change investment, and that's how we have to look at transportation. So, making it easier to bike and safer to bike, making it easier to walk, those are climate change investments, and that's how we need to look at it, and that's how I'll look at those investments on City Council.
Thank you. Cheryl?
Thank you. So my office was the one that put forth the declare a climate emergency and the fossil-free city. And I also put in an item to ban the sale of new cars that are fossil-free. It's in also, that use fuel. And that's at a policy committee currently. We just have to now I lost sight of the question, I'm sorry. But we have to do all that we can to imagine a fossil-free city. Now is the time. In this item that I put forth, we have until 2030. But look at where we are. It's already too late. So we have to think of ways and get everybody on board, and because everybody doesn't believe in climate change. But here we are experiencing it firsthand. And we have to do all that we can now to make sure that we have a future. Thank you.
Terry?
I think transit-oriented housing is going to be big for this, building housing at BART, building housing along transit corridors, also making it so that people can walk around, bike around, use scooters, use wheels safely. People shouldn't have to, for folks who don't need to rely on automobiles, we shouldn't be forced to. We also need to make sure that all of our mobility options are accessible and inclusive. So I support making more micro-mobility options, e-scooters, e-bikes available for more households, shuttles, as I mentioned earlier, more buses. We also need bus rapid transit on places like Telegraph or University or Shattuck. These are streets that Shattuck especially would be perfect to have a pedestrianized downtown. But there are things that we don't have to wait to 2040 to get done because we started doing them in 2006 when I was graduating high school. So we should also prioritize the things that we already have in our plans. And I'm here to push all that stuff forward. As a commissioner, it's kind of my primary motive anyway.
Thank you. Timothy?
All right, so the specific question was, what changes would I bring to the city council to reduce the use of fossil fuel in our city? So one of the specific things that you're going to see from me is when it comes to development, any units that are proposed, four or more units, the developer should put an EV, an electric vehicle, in that unit. And one of the parking places should be assigned just for those tenants or the owners in that building. This will encourage the people who live there to be more comfortable not owning a fossil fuel vehicle. It's built in right here. It's part of your fees, it's part of your cost. Use it. This is going to immediately reduce the need for parking, because if you have a child, you need to get them to work or school, you need a car. Well, you have access to it. One of the other things I bring to the city council is something very similar to the Emory go-round. We should have something like that that can address the specific needs of the one-off use that we would need in the city. So I think my time's up.
Thank you. Okay, and I think it's my turn to ask the last question from those submitted by the audience. And Cheryl, you will be the first to answer. So this is a simple question. What role does market rate housing play in addressing housing affordability in Berkeley and the climate crisis?
What role does market rate? Can you say that one more time?
What role does market rate housing play in addressing Berkeley's housing affordability and climate crisis?
That's a good question. And I'm not even sure I know the answer. But, you know, market rate, I feel market rate housing, we don't need anymore. We need to find ways to build affordable housing. People are on the street. People are losing their homes. COVID is going to create all kinds of havoc. You know, the systemic and structural and the institutional racism that's going on in this country has to cease and desist. We can't go back to corporations and to things, business as usual. We have to find ways to find affordable housing. Market rate, we have plenty of. I know they say that it pays for the affordable, but I mean, right now, we need to come up with some new options. And I think we can, because now is the time. Now is the time to support new ways to reimagine our world and our lives. We can't go back. Thank you.
Thank you. Terry?
Market rate housing could house students. It could prevent my grandma from having to compete with young professional families. It can subsidize below market rate housing. It can prevent people from having to drive from 3 hours away to get to work.
Thank you. Timothy?
So I believe your question was, what is market rate housing? How does that contribute to the climate crisis?
No, the question was, what role does market rate housing have to play in solving Berkeley's housing affordability and climate crisis?
So market rate housing actually plays no role in that. It's really, the market rate is really just for the profits of the developers. So the role it plays is absolutely zero. I mean, if we were to wipe out market rate housing altogether, eliminate the profits from the developers, which is not possible, but if we were, then most of the units here would be affordable. So I don't think market rate housing plays much of a role at all, in not much of a beneficial role at all in this scenario.
Thank you. Alex?
We need all types of housing for all types of people. We need housing at every income level. We need all types of housing, and part of that is market rate housing. So I think what you heard from the incumbent was wishy-washy climate denialism. That's where we are right now. We need all types of housing. If we're not building housing in the Inner Bay, we're adding to our transportation greenhouse gases. If you don't understand that link at this point, you don't deserve to lead. This is a moral issue. Climate change is a moral issue, which means everything that contributes to climate change, our transportation systems, our housing issues, if they weren't a moral issue in their own right, then they are because they're related to climate change. And so I'm frankly really shook and scared about some of the answers I just heard, because we need housing at every single income level. And if you don't understand that, I think that's disqualifying for leading in a city that wants to prioritize addressing climate change. Webinars aren't going to do the trick. A webinar has never reduced greenhouse gas emissions, but building housing near transit has.
Okay, thank you. So now we are at our summing up stage of the forum, and each candidate will be given 1 minute to sum up their idea, tell us what they will do if they are elected to Berkeley City Council to address the 3 issues we've raised tonight: transportation, housing, and climate change emissions. And Terry, you are first.
There is a long legacy and high bar for African-American leadership in the city of Berkeley. However, the African-American population has fallen from 20% to 8.4%. To preserve what diversity remains, we must elect leaders who understand that housing justice is climate and racial justice. We need leaders who know that compact growth, transit-oriented housing, and bicycle, pedestrian, transit, and micromobility modes of transport are the key to reducing vehicle miles traveled, curbing sprawl into fire zones, and limiting greenhouse gases. I am proud to have the support of State Treasurer Fiona Ma, State Senator Nancy Skinner, Assembly Member Buffy Wicks, the East Bay Stonewall Democratic Club, the Berkeley Democratic Club, the Berkeley Firefighters, the Building Trades, Mayor Arreguín, the supermajority of the City Council, every elected member of the school board, BART Board Directors Atiba Simon or Rebecca Saltzman, AC Transit Board Directors President Joe Wallace. I would be honored to have your support, and I look forward to working with all these leaders and all of you to get our jobs done. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Timothy, your 1-minute summary.
So I think the primary thing here is housing. Once we address the housing issue, the other issues will need to follow behind it, whether it's transportation and climate. If we address the housing issue in a manner that helps the real world person reduce their use of fossil fuels, that's going to affect positively. That's going to positively affect our climate change. If we build housing in a manner that is transit centric, which I think we need to do by readdressing the West Berkeley plan to encompass that, I think we will address the transportation issue as well. But it needs to start with housing, and it needs to be a sensible, self-sustaining manner of housing. And I think the other things will fall into place, or they will be in a manner where we can address them. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. All right, Alex.
Yeah, so my name is Alex Schranko. I'm running to represent District 2 on City Council, and I've been endorsed by Buffy Wicks, Councilmember Lori Drosty, Rashi Kesarwani, Susan Wingraf, the Berkeley Firefighters, and others. But you know what? You shouldn't vote for me or endorse me because of who's endorsed me. I think we've seen real contrast in our approaches to what addressing climate change looks like in 2020 tonight. And you should vote for me and you should endorse me because I understand that housing and transportation, they're moral issues, they're climate issues, and we can't address climate change unless we're investing in public transit, we're prioritizing public transit, and we're building housing in Berkeley. That doesn't mean all developments are good, they're not. But when we see a good project, like one that's going to build $40 million of affordable housing, we vote yes. If you're voting no on projects like that, you can't claim to be a supporter of trying to address climate change. And that's the real contrast that I think you've seen tonight. And that's why I think I'm the right person to lead District 2 as we address climate change moving forward.
All right, thank you, Alex. Cheryl, you will wrap it up for us.
Thank you. And so I've been a leader in climate since Berkeley declared, which was the third person to declare, the third city to declare. And since then, 1,772 governments around the world have declared climate emergencies. And I have been a climate leader throughout the world, actually. And I'll be continuing my bold climate leadership with environmental justice policies. And I will fight for affordable housing at the North Berkeley and Ashby sites. And I will continue to be the champion, the voice of the people, the voice of the council, the conscience of the council, and continue my leadership that I have started in 2016. My voice is different from the other voices on the council because I will not be bought or sold. And I will not fall in line just because. No, I am a leader. I will continue to be. I have the Gus Newport, Danny Glover, Kate Harrison, Ben Bartlett, Our Revolution, BTU, BCA, BPA, Wellstone Club, all endorse me. You can go to www.cheryldavilaboat to find out more. Thank you very much. Have a blessed day, stay healthy, and be safe.
All right, thank you so much to all of our 4 candidates for Berkeley City Council District 2 and for the 60 people who joined us tonight on this forum. We appreciate the 40 questions that were submitted for the candidates. I'm sorry we couldn't ask them all. We encourage you to find out more about all these great candidates for this district and to go out and vote. Thank you very much.
And complete the census.
That is the end of our forum. Thank you.
For District 2. We will have our District 6 forum scheduled to start in 3 minutes at 7:15. But for now, everyone sticking around is free to take a break. The chat is open. You can also unmute yourselves and talk among yourselves for the next few minutes till our candidates get here. Thank you. Enjoy the break.
I will just say that I have been, this is to help kind of live tweeting as BNHCA. I think I've caught everything accurately, but welcome any feedback at a different point.
Let's do it again. On this smoky ash-filled day, when climate change is foremost in our minds, I welcome you to Berkeley City Council District 6 Candidate Forum, which is hosted by Berkeley Neighbors for Housing and Climate Action, Walk Bike Berkeley, and CalDems. My name is Betsy Thagard. I will be moderating this forum and asking the question from Berkeley Neighbors for Housing and Climate Action. Berkeley Neighbors educates voters about the connection between Berkeley's housing shortage and its increasing climate change emissions. Carbon dioxide from transportation constitutes more than 60% of Berkeley's climate change emissions, and those emissions are going up, not down. Scientists have directly linked these increasing emissions to growing automobile travel caused by Berkeley's housing shortage. Because Berkeley has not built enough homes over the past 50 years, more and more workers cannot afford to live in the city in which they work, and so they must drive to work from further and further away. Workers in Berkeley now commute daily from places like Stockton, Tracy, and Manteca. To ease our housing shortage and reduce our climate emissions, Berkeley Neighbors advocates for more housing for all types and for all income levels. We especially want more money for our low-income and extremely low-income neighbors. But because low-income housing is built with fees on the construction of market rate housing, maximizing the number of homes for our lower-income neighbors requires Berkeley to facilitate construction of market rate housing, because that's what funds these more affordable developments. Berkeley Neighbors also calls for zoning changes that will allow construction of more missing middle housing. That's homes for middle-income workers, such as teachers, firefighters, office workers, and municipal employees. These workers do not qualify for subsidized low-income housing, and Berkeley's housing shortage has resulted in rents and home prices that are too damn high. Infill housing in single-family neighborhoods is one of the best ways to provide homes for middle-income families so that the people who serve our community can afford to live here. Ben, will you please introduce Walk Bike Berkeley?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ben Gerhardstein. I'm a coordinating committee member with Walk Bike Berkeley. We are an all-volunteer organization that advocates for a healthy, equitable, and sustainable transportation system in Berkeley for people of all ages and abilities. As Betsy said, 60% of Berkeley's climate emissions are transportation related. People in Berkeley, nonetheless, want to walk, bike, and use transit to meet their daily needs. Unfortunately, many are forced to drive because we haven't provided safe infrastructure and reliable transit. People in Berkeley actually walk for about 40% of trips, but unfortunately experience 80% of the severe and fatal collisions that happen on our streets. And those collisions are disproportionately located in historically redlined South and West Berkeley. Our sidewalks and street surfaces are broken. The bike boulevard network is riddled with unsafe intersections, and none of our arterials have bus lanes. So we need to take bold action to meet our climate safety, equity, and housing goals. And at Walk Bike Berkeley, our current priorities include the quick implementation of the Vision Zero Action Plan to eliminate severe and fatal collisions in Berkeley by 2028. Ensuring that the city implements council policy like BBMBOP, which was passed last year, a referral to dedicate at least 50% of repaving funds to bikeways and high pedestrian injury streets, and advancing the movement for Black Lives by transferring traffic and parking enforcement from the Berkeley Police Department to unarmed personnel in a new equity and safety focused Berkeley Department of Transportation, or BerkDOT. So we're looking forward to hearing from you tonight, and I'll pass it over to Davina to introduce CalDems.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Davina Siriudum. I go by the she, her pronouns, and I'm here today on behalf of Cal Berkeley Democrats, the official Democratic chapter of UC Berkeley. A little bit about our organization is that we're a campus club dedicated to advocating for progressive change, specifically through key policies and individuals that will act with student interest in mind. And so shifting onto the topic of students, and me being a student myself, it's clear that Berkeley is home to many, and students with a variety of distinct stories, backgrounds, and perspectives are drawn to Berkeley, whether it be because of the welcoming community or the countless opportunities that Berkeley provides to them. And because of this, we see how eager students are to be a part of this community that values their input and encourages them to learn, engage, and collaborate with others in meaningful ways that will contribute towards the cultural diversity and vitality of Berkeley. Alternatively, though, we also see how there's a major lack of support for students, specifically through housing. Currently, UC Berkeley ranks the lowest out of 9 in the UC system in the percentage of students that are housed by the university. And this is clearly shown and reflected when we hear the countless stories of students who are struggling to make ends meet, having to work multiple jobs or couch surf because of the lack of affordable housing, the high cost of rent, and just the overall lack of stability in housing. And so today, I'm very excited to hear from each of the candidates of District 6 today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who's here and is a part of this forum right now. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Davina. So this is the way our forum will work. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to introduce themselves and their ideas concerning housing, transportation, and climate policies in Berkeley. Then the moderators will take turns asking the candidates 2 questions from each of our organizations. Each candidate will be asked the same question, and they will be called on a rotating basis so that everyone has a chance to go first. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer the questions. After the prepared questions are answered, each of the moderators will choose 1 question submitted anonymously from the audience through the Google form found in the chat box. Finally, each candidate will be given 1 minute to sum up their policy ideas regarding how to address Berkeley's housing, transportation, and climate change needs. So we're going to try and stick to the time limits, and Savlon Hauser will be our timekeeper. Savlon, do you want to just demonstrate how you're going to show people when they've met their time?
I can't see her on my screen. Hang on.
Savlon, I think you're going to go like this.
I'll do this, and if you're really going on, I'll also be unmuted and ask you to observe the time.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Savlon. Okay, and thank you very much to our 2 candidates for District 6 who are here tonight, Richard Ilgen. Did I say that right? Ilgen?
It's actually Ilgen.
Ilgen. Richard Ilgen, thank you, and Susan Wingraf. So first we'll have 2 minutes for each candidate to give us their statements about housing, transportation, and climate policies in Berkeley. And we will go alphabetically by first name. So Richard, you are first.
Okay, I'm running in this because District 6 deserves an effective, accountable representative. And I think we can make real progress in our district and our city with an effective representative. Look, I've been a housing corporation for 10 years. I've worked was in the Oakland City Attorney's Office for 20 years. We're dealing with major developers from a city perspective. And for students, I'm an example of what students can do. I was the first student as an undergraduate, or any student appointed to a city commission way back many years ago. And from that, I issued, it was on a rental housing commission, I issued a minority report that called for rent control because of the ongoing rental crisis in Berkeley. From that, it turned into the first rent control law. And from there, we have the rent control law that we have today. And now rent control is the norm. There's rent control in major cities and rent control throughout the state. As I say, and in terms of environmental issues, I've also served on the Planning Commission in addition to serving on the Rent Board, and there I was able to work with environmentalists to put Berkeley waterfront. I've also worked so I have a strong environmental background. I think Berkeley can build more housing. It can prioritizing affordable housing. It can respond to the climate crisis by doing such things as putting in BRT lines. I know the council voted down the BRT for Telegraph, which I think was a wrong decision. And I think we ought to put BRT line in along San Pablo.
Time.
Oh, time?
And I'm going to take this opportunity. I think you might have some connection issues, Richard, if you didn't hear from someone else.
People couldn't hear me?
You faded out a couple of times.
Yeah, I had connections earlier and got cut off. So, okay, I'm not sure what to do at the moment. I can try calling in if you want.
Ben, you're our expert. Do you have any suggestions?
If you have anything in the background that's running, closing that might help. But if you have a good cell service up there, calling in might be the easiest way to ensure your voice comes through consistently. Yes.
Okay, so
lousy cell service. Let me try it this way. Hang on.
Okay. All right. While you're sorting that out, Richard, we will ask Susan to give us her 2-minute summary of. Susan?
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you all. I have to say, this is a pretty big discussion, especially for a time like this. I'm not sure that we can actually solve the problems that we're dealing with in terms of climate change, but I think that we all have a personal individual responsibility to do as much as we can. I've been on the Berkeley City Council for 12 years, and prior to that, I was on the Planning Commission for 18 years. And that's on the Planning Commission is where I actually got my education about the need for housing on transit corridors and the need and the relationship between housing and transit and the relationship between jobs and housing. And I want to just tell you a little bit of background because I think you'll find it interesting. I cut my teeth on Berkeley politics opposing an extremely modest project on the corner of Rose and Shattuck. That's how I got involved in Berkeley politics. Just yesterday, the developer of that project called me and asked me if he could make a contribution to my campaign and told me that he wanted to put up street signs. And I said, oh my God, you know, I made your life so miserable for 3 years. And he said, no, you did what you had to do and I have total respect for you. And I see that how you've grown over the years. So it was very fulfilling for me to see that that this guy whose life I really made miserable for 3 years, you know, understood and has forgiven me and has acknowledged that I have changed. So over the 18 years that I was on the Planning Commission, I learned a lot about land use regulation and I learned about the effect on the climate. Since I've been elected, I think I've probably voted for every housing project that's come before the council, including some that have been challenged. I think we have pretty good policies. We need to work more on our policies, but we also need to address process because that's where we really get tripped up. I'll talk more about that later. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Susan. All right, Ben, will you ask Walk Bike Berkeley's first question? And Susan, you will be the first to answer.
Sure will. Okay, so this question is, Berkeley streets and sidewalks have suffered from years of deferred maintenance. How should the city revise its paving and sidewalk policies to prioritize walking and biking while also correcting geographic inequities?
We need to address them. It's a question of resources. And I think that obviously we're not doing a very good job at maintaining our infrastructure. We need to do more paving. We need to do better paving. We need to do more sidewalk repair. We're way behind on our sidewalk program. It's causing all kinds of trips and falls for which we have to pay out, you know, lawsuits. So I'm very much in favor of doing that. I think right now it's a question of allocation of resources, and we need to figure out how to do the paving so that it's more environmentally friendly. I really don't like the idea of pouring asphalt all over town. And I think that we need to look at more contemporary modern ways of fixing our streets. So if you will remember, Ben, that I know that Wildcat Canyon is a very frequently used road by bicyclists, and there were several accidents up there. And a couple of years ago, I was able to get Wildcat Canyon paved, as well as Grizzly Peak, for the safety of the bicyclists. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Richard, your turn.
Can you hear me okay now?
There's an echo and there's a lot of feedback, Richard.
Yeah, hang on. Yeah. All right. I have another. I'm on areas of the city that where there are a lot of walkers, and see, especially in South and West Berkeley, where there are a lot of problems in the with walkability and with the where the streets and the sidewalks are in bad shape. But I'm running in District 6. There are problems in District 6 also. Let me give you some examples. The pathways up there, if you look on the city's website for evacuation purposes, they tell you, look at the evacuation routes, which only give you major streets, and look at the pathways from the map from the Berkeley Path Wanderers. The problem is these pathways are in miserable shape. They're deteriorating, they're steep, they're hazardous, they have no railings in many of them. They're extremely dangerous to go down, but they're touted as being evacuation routes. So that's a serious problem for anybody. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Davina will ask the first question from CalDems, and Richard, you will be the first to answer.
Okay.
All right, so our first question is, how do you plan on encouraging the UC to pursue greater action in resolving housing affordability issues among students, workers, and the broader community?
Well, I think we need to lean on the university. When I was on the planning commission, I leaned on the university about a number of issues that the university had, and they responded in some cases favorably, in some cases not. But I think we have to move, if necessary, higher up. Look at the regions, going to the regions and getting the regions to intercede, getting the legislature to intercede, and just generally putting more pressure on the university to create the housing. The university does not provide us with enough housing, not just for students, but for the workers they bring in and the other service people that have to come in to service the university. So it's both students and the workers who need that housing. Students principally, and then the workers who need the. Whenever the university builds housing, from that. When the university does build housing and take properties off the market, we need to get revenues from the university to make up for that, because that's causing more of a shortfall, and we're providing major services to the university that they're essentially not paying for.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Susan?
The university has a responsibility to build housing for their students. We are the worst. I think UC Berkeley is the worst in the entire system in terms of providing housing. I've been advocating for developing housing on People's Park for years. When I first was elected to council, I met with one of the vice chancellors, and he said, no, we don't want to touch it. We don't want to go near it. Now, finally, Chancellor Christ has agreed to move forward, and I'm very excited about that. Chancellor Christ seems to be committed to building housing, and I'm very glad to see that happening. I'm just concerned that not enough will be done during her tenure. But I really feel that they have a responsibility. Now, the other problem they're having is recruiting faculty, because entry-level faculty cannot afford to live in Berkeley either. And the university should also step up and try to provide housing for faculty and staffers as well. I really think that they have been negligent in this area. And I want to say that they need to provide safe housing for their students. So much of the housing around the campus is really not safe. It's in terrible condition. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Susan. So the next question will be the first one from Berkeley Neighbors for Housing and Climate Action, and Susan, you will answer first. Other progressive cities like Portland, Oregon, and Minneapolis are addressing their housing shortages by passing missing middle infill zoning legislation that permits and incentivizes construction of duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes on parcels zoned single family. Would you support this type of legislation in all district areas of Berkeley?
So my answer is yes, with a condition. I'm concerned about displacement, and I think that there have to be some provisions to protect against displacement. I'm concerned about speculation, and again, I think there have to be some provisions to protect against speculation. And then I think somebody said something about this is naturally affordable housing, but I would like to hear more about that, because there are no guarantees that it will be affordable. So if it's going to happen, I support it happening, but I need to have answers to all of those things. The other thing is if we're talking about taking a 2,000 square foot house and dividing it up into 3 units, which was part of the missing middle proposal that I looked at earlier, those units are not going to be large enough for families. So how does that work? We're not really providing family-sized housing if we do that. But I'm totally open to exploring all of this and seeing if it's possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard?
I support it with some caveats also. Look, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I was getting an unstable across my screen. Basically, I'm not sure that it's going to create affordable housing, for one thing. If you build new housing, it is going to be more expensive than what's there. If we're taking and carving up units, you may be able to create some housing, but again, I would agree that it's likely to be smaller housing units, and in some cases, duplexes will be available for families, and that's okay. In some areas, it may not be appropriate just because there is no place to put cars and other things that will come along with it. In some areas, there's no access to public transportation. The streets are very narrow. There are already too many cars on many of the streets. So in some cases, it may not be put do more units in many areas, that and infill housing, so on. That's great. Some of the things I've done before as a nonprofit housing developer was exactly that, putting in infill housing. Okay.
Thank you, Richard. Your connection still isn't all that great. I'm not sure what you can do about it, but
am I still coming? Can you hear me when I'm talking?
Sometimes, but then you fade out.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. Wanted to let you know for any future forums that you may be participating in. So let's see. The next question would be the second one from Bike Berkeley. And Richard, you will be the first to answer.
Okay.
All right, so the second question we have is, do you support creating a Berkeley Department of Transportation? And if yes, how do you envision BerkDOT advancing safety, equity, and climate goals?
Well, I think, in some cases, I don't support adding departments to an existing department, but I think help with just a plan to develop more transportation alternatives, such as, for example, I think one of the things that we've got is how do we get people to public transportation? And I think I think there were some of the earlier questions tonight were focused on that. I think we need to look at possibly shuttle buses, because in many areas, like in District 6, there are very few buses. So how are we going to get people from their homes to public transportation? I think that's a major issue. And I hate to see people using their cars. If we can So if we can have more shuttle services, some cities have put in shuttle services and they work very effectively. We even have a shuttle service in West Berkeley that works very effectively. And I think we need to be able to get people from their homes to the public transportation corridors. If we're not going to, in addition to building on public corridors to reduce the need for shuttle services, I think a Department of Transportation can work on those. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Susan?
Yeah, Ben, could you repeat the question? Because I'm not sure that Richard actually addressed it, and I want to make sure that I do. What is the question, please, Richard? Ben?
Sure, yeah, the question is, do you support creating a Berkeley Department of Transportation, which was one of the ideas that Council authorized as part of the reimagining public safety process? And if yes, how do you envision BerkDOT advancing safety, equity, and climate goals?
Okay, thank you. So again, this is an issue that I very much want to explore. I want to see if there are areas where we can employ civilians to do certain functions of the Berkeley Police Department. I'm not sure traffic stops is going to work out. I've heard concerns about actually traffic stops being quite dangerous, and I'm not sure that it's a good thing to put civilians in harm's way on that one. But I am interested in exploring all areas where we can use unarmed, trained people to fulfill some of the responsibilities that Berkeley Police have taken on in the past years, including using mental health workers and social workers to address the homeless problem. I'm not really in favor of creating a new department, and I have to say the transportation department that we have currently is limping along and is understaffed. So we need to bolster that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Susan. Next is the second question from CalDems, and Susan, you will be the first to answer.
All right, our second question is, how would you approach balancing the housing needs of the growing student community with the needs of existing community members who are at risk of displacement?
I go first?
Yes.
Well, again, I think we go back to that same thing, that the university has a responsibility to build housing for their students. Nobody should be displaced because we have students in Berkeley. It's the responsibility of the university to build the housing for the students. So I'm not exactly sure what you're getting at with your question, but if the university accepted the responsibility and built the housing that was required to house all of their students, we wouldn't have a displacement problem. That's my answer.
Okay, thank you. Richard?
First of all, displacement is a real serious problem. That's where we have eviction protections and other protections in Berkeley to help prevent displacement. And I think if you look at the costs for housing, if you can keep someone in their home and avoid displacement, it's a lot less expensive than having to build new units. I think first of all, we need to look at strategies around avoiding more displacement. And that would include helping people with rental payments, helping folks who are at risk for losing their homes from mortgage foreclosure, assist help build more housing. There's an incentive to displace tenants because of vacancy decontrol. And because landlords get major rent increases up to market whenever there's a displacement. And so I think if that incentive was taken away, that would avoid some displacement. Yes, I see that.
Okay, thank you, Richard. You'll be the first to answer the second question from Berkeley Neighbors for Housing and Climate Action.
Okay.
And the question is that construction of low-income and extremely low-income housing requires large government subsidies, most of which comes from fees on the construction of market rate housing. How will you ensure that Berkeley raises as much money as possible to build as many homes as possible for our low-income and extremely low-income neighbors?
Well, first of all, since having been a housing person, I'm not sure that all the money, major money comes from that fund. That fund has for getting other funds and other financing mechanisms. The housing at the sites where there's publicly owned sites, such as the BART sites. Those sites, because they're publicly owned, can be used to reduce the cost of the housing, as one of the major costs of developing housing is in the land costs. And I think for purposes of getting those additional fees, I think whenever market rate housing is built, we need to look at the formulas and maximize the amount of fees we're getting if we're not putting housing directly into those developments, which is another way of getting some housing built, because they have the option of putting low-income housing directly in those developments. So I think if we can be sure to maximize the fees from those developments that do go in, again, we can use that to leverage money to build more more affordable housing.
Thank you. Susan?
Can you repeat the question, Bessie?
Yes. Construction of low-income and extremely low-income housing requires large government subsidies, most of which comes from fees on the construction of market rate housing. How will you ensure that Berkeley raises as much money as possible to build as many homes as possible for our low-income and extremely low-income neighbors?
Okay, so first of all, we have a 20% inclusionary requirement right now, which is higher than many cities in the state. So that's one thing that we're doing. I believe in supply and demand. I don't know, I haven't heard very many people talk about supply and demand tonight, but I believe in supply and demand. And I think that the more housing we build, the more affordable the housing will become. So I believe that we have a responsibility to build all kinds of housing. One of the problems that we're having is that the affordable housing fees are currently based on units rather than square footage. And I think that we should be looking at reevaluating that and seeing if we should be changing to a fee per square foot rather than a fee per square unit, per unit, because developers are monkeying around with that, basically.
Okay, thank you, Susan. So next we will have 3 questions from the audience chosen by the moderators. Ben will ask the first question, and Susan, you will give the first answer.
All right, so my audience chosen question is, how will you help your constituents transition from being dependent on cars, those that are, which have historically contributed to climate change and traffic violence? I'll restate that again since I know I fumbled it. How will you help your constituents transition from being dependent on cars, which have historically contributed to climate change and traffic violence?
I represent the hills, okay? The hills are underserved by transit, and actually they're being threatened with no service at all. So we're facing a huge challenge in terms of getting people out of their cars. I have advocated for electric vehicles and improving electric vehicle structure since I came on council. I'm an early adapter, and I drive an EV. And I feel that we need to make it easier for people to drive EVs. I'm also very encouraged by electric bicycles. I have friends who live in the hills who have bought electric bicycles, and they're now bicycling. So I would like to see us encourage electric bicycles as well as electric vehicles, and create the infrastructure that's necessary in the city to encourage their use. Right now, our electric vehicle infrastructure is pathetically bad. And one of the things that I did actually was start a pilot program for establishing electric vehicle charging places in the public right of way.
Time.
Right, thank you. Richard.
Okay, for getting people out of their vehicles in the hills, I where they need to go. And again, which used to transit students around the campus area. And I think if we can develop systems like that, I think we can cut down some of the driving needs to take place because we need to get students to the university, we need to get professors to the university, we need to get workers to the university, and we need to get people to public transit. So that's the shuttle service is one thing. I also think we've not done enough to encourage use of electric vehicles. The city had the opportunity to buy electric vehicles for parking meter vehicles, and they turned them down. They bought gas-powered vehicles instead of electric vehicles. So I think the city itself needs to look at its own house to see how we can improve use of electric vehicles. I think there are a number of systems. Again, I've seen in other cities where they put electric vehicle charging stations in place of parking meters in some places. So on the streets, in parking garages, in other areas where, in parking lots, where they now have technology.
Okay, thank you. Richard, you'll be the first to answer the question from the audience put forth by Davina.
All right, so this audience question starts with, we are currently seeing a disturbing decrease in public transit availability due to the pandemic. Just to name a few examples, bus line 65 has been suspended on weekends and BART does not run after 9 p.m. What will the candidates do as council members to help public transport systems overcome the financial difficulties they are facing?
Well, I think we need to look at ways of assisting them by and also by making transit passes available to people, selling discount transit passes to folks, which can help fund some of the like AC Transit, which is basically providing free services at the moment, but in the meanwhile, they're also cutting out major services like to the hills, and that's a serious problem. I'm hopeful that once we get past the pandemic, that some of the ridership will come back and will increase, but I think we need to also make it easier to use BART. And so I think we need to, in order to get people to use BART and use public transit, we need to make sure they can get there to use it. And I agree, electric bicycles are another way of doing it. Again, I keep harping on shuttle buses, but I think they're real important, and I think they can be used effectively. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan?
Tell me the question again, please.
All right, I'm just going to go straight to the question. What will the candidates do as council members to help public transport systems overcome the financial difficulties they're facing due to the pandemic?
Thank you. Frankly, honestly, I really think that it's not just AC Transit, it's every public transit system in the country that's suffering right now. And I really think the only answer is a federal bailout. And my solution is please vote in November.
Thank you, Susan. All right, the last audience question I will give, and Susan, you'll answer first. What is your specific vision and your priorities for development on the Ashby and the North Berkeley BART station parking lots?
I have a dream. I have a vision that all kinds of housing will be built there. And for North Berkeley in particular, I feel like the center of the site should be higher and more dense, and that as it comes out towards the edge, that it should come down in height so that it is a little bit more compatible with the single family neighborhood that surrounds it. But I really see a core maybe even of towers in the center. I also would like to see some commercial synergy there. I'd like to see maybe a supermarket, a dry cleaner, some neighborhood serving commercial on the site, so that people getting off BART or going to BART can do their daily chores. I'm more familiar with the North Berkeley site, honestly, than I am with the Ashby site. But I think that Ashby has, timeout, sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Susan. Richard?
I believe we should put affordable housing only on publicly owned sites. That includes both the Ashby station and the North Berkeley station. I think we have an opportunity to make up for the lack of meeting our commitments for affordable housing by putting affordable housing on those sites. I don't think we should be putting any kind of market rate housing on those sites and helping effectively to subsidize market rate housing on those sites. Market rate housing can go where in market available sites elsewhere in the city. But I think we need to make a commitment that that's where the affordable housing is going to be. And affordable housing it's very low income, it's low income, but it's also up to moderate housing also for the workers, for the nurses, to be forced out of Berkeley. And plus in South Berkeley, we've seen such displacement there over the years of the African-American population because it's become unaffordable for a lot of folks. So I think we need to focus on bringing back people who were displaced and giving them some kind of priority in being able to live there, in addition to the workers, the nurses, and everybody else who needs that kind of housing. But it has to be affordable housing. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Richard. We're now at the end of the forum where we'll ask each candidate to take 1 minute to summarize their priorities for the Berkeley City Council on housing, transportation, and climate. Richard, you go first.
Okay. One of the things that has been talked about in terms of climate is the fire danger up here. We have a severe fire danger in the hills. If there's another fire in the hills, you can imagine the climate disaster that will bring. I think we have not done enough to reduce the fire danger in the hills. So that's we have orange skies in addition. The fire danger in the hills in addition to the other things that have been discussed. I think we need to move to more electric vehicles. I think we can encourage people to have more electric vehicles in terms of housing. I think I've laid it out. I think housing, we can put housing in a lot of different places around this city, but I think we need to reserve our publicly owned sites for affordable housing. I think that can reduce the cost of affordable housing, reduce the need for subsidies. And I think we can do it. There's, again, I've got a housing background, so I understand how this housing gets financed and how it gets built and how it gets subsidized. I think we can improve areas where we can use electric bikes and make it easier and safer to use electric bicycles to commute around the city. So I think those are the kind of priorities that I would see.
Thank you, Richard. Susan?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to focus my comments on transportation and housing. I co-sponsored the Vision Zero initiative. I personally have had 4 friends who have been hit by vehicles in the past 2 years, 3 of them with life-altering injuries. Things are out of control. And one of the things that we haven't talked about is lighting and the importance of lighting, both for pedestrian safety and bicycle safety. And I just want to mention that in 2017, I created the City UC Student Relations Committee, which meets with students. And lighting is a very, very big issue for students who are walking around the campus. It's underlit, and we need to do something about that. Building more housing on transit corridors is essential. We have plenty of space to build. University Avenue, San Pablo Avenue, Shattuck Avenue, Telegraph Avenue. There is so much opportunity. One of the problems in Berkeley is that our our process is overregulated. I'm sorry I didn't get to address that issue with you because I think it's very important. We need to change the process.
Okay, thank you to both candidates for District 6 in Berkeley City Council races this year. Next Thursday at the same time, and I believe the same Zoom link, we will have 2 more candidate forums for Districts 5 and 3. So join us then.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you all for joining us.